There's 7 of them. And although the Apostle John is arrested by the Romans and placed in exile on the Isle of Patmos, while he's there, he receives a prophetic vision. Literally a vision of what is going to happen in the future. And he not only testifies of what he saw, but he puts it in a letter and he sends it to the 7 churches he has authority over. The one he pastors in Ephesus and the other 6 that he has oversight over. Now here's what's interesting, is that Jesus, who gave John the vision, has specific messages for each of the churches. And by the fact he closes each of the messages with these words, he who overcomes, or to him who overcomes, we get a clear idea that what he said to these churches become, if you will, a roadmap for us on how we can stay an overcomer in this fallen world. So let's take a look at the 7 messages that he gave to these churches. The first church he mentions is the church in Ephesus. Let's take a look at it there. It starts to tell us the message at the beginning of chapter 2. These are the words of him who holds the 7 stars in his right hand and walks among the 7 golden lampstands. I know your deeds, your hard work, and your perseverance. I know that you cannot tolerate wicked men, and you have tested those who claim to be apostles but are not, and have found them false. You have persevered and endured the hardships for my name and have not grown weary. So all of a sudden he tells us a number of things just in that letter of how to stay an overcomer. The first is we must work hard and not grow weary. And secondly, we must persevere in spite of hardships. And we must utilize the gift of discerning of spirits. That is not allowing wicked people to influence us. There are people that want to make you do evil things. They want to scam you. They want to deceive you. One of the things you'll notice in the book of Revelation is the prominence of how evil lying is. We almost kind of think lying is no big deal. But did you know if you're a liar, you can't go to heaven? The Bible makes it very clear. You say, why does the Bible make such a big issue about lying? It's because Satan is the father of lies. It's through lies that he deceives and he causes you to do evil. So you'll notice here we need to discern between what is truth and what is a lie. But the final thing in the book of Revelation, Revelation to the letter to the Ephesians is very fascinating. Listen to what he says. Verse 4, yet I hold this against you. You have forsaken your first love. Remember the height from which you have fallen. Repent and do the things you did at first. If you do not repent, I will come to you and remove your lampstand from its place. Wow, but you have this in your favor. You hate the practices of the Nicolaitans, which I also hate. Now here's what's interesting. This was a great church, the Ephesian church. They did good deeds. They worked hard. They discerned between good and evil, and it was great, but there was something wrong. They had forsaken their first love. That is, they weren't as passionate for the Lord as they once were. How many of you know that that can be a problem in our life? It can be a problem in our relationships. For many years, I did my doctorate in pastoral counseling, so for many years, probably good 25 years or more, I would do most of the counseling in this church, and I had wonderful experiences in my office. I remember one occasion where a couple came in. They were so angry at each other. They were screaming at the top of their lungs. I thought they were going to haul off and hit each other. I mean, that's how mad they were. And I'm sitting there watching this drama unfold. Now, what do you do in a case like that? How do you deal with that? Well, I sat them down and I said, would you please share with me when you fell in love? And so the girl starts, said, well, he was so kind, and his eyes were so sparkling. When I saw them, I melted, and I just wanted to be with him. And when he held my hand, shivers went through my body. Talked to the husband. He said, oh, wow. When I saw her, my heart went to-do. And after a while, all of a sudden, all the anger was gone. They were remembering what it was to fall in love. What was it like when you first began to serve the Lord? How passionate you were for Him. How you wanted to love Him and love everyone around you. You wanted to see people come to the Lord. But over the years, what happens, you get in routine and you sometimes forget that awesome relationship with the living Lord. A beautiful marriage is a marriage that never forgets what it is to love. So it is with our relationship with God. And so one of the ways that we begin to understand how we become an overcomer is, yes, we must work hard and not grow weary. We must be persevering in spite of hardship. We must utilize the gifts of discernment and not allow wicked people to influence us. But finally, we should not forsake our first love. In fact, we should love God and love people. Jesus said something very significant in Matthew 24 when He talks about verses 11 and 12. He says, many false prophets will appear and deceive many people. Because of the increase of wickedness, the love of most will grow cold. The very nature of the world in which we live in is a world in which the enemy is trying to harden our hearts. And whether we realize it or not, it's not only in marriages that he does that. He tries to do that in your relationship with God, where the passion for the Lord is no longer there. If we're going to be an overcomer, we have to stir up our love for God. We need to take that extra time to seek His presence, be in church, love on Him, express our love to Him. The second letter is the letter to the Smyrna. And you'll notice when you look at that letter, he says, these are the words of Him who is the first and last, who died and came to life again. I know your afflictions and your poverty, yet you are rich. I know the slander of those who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Do not be afraid of what you are about to suffer. I tell you, the devil will put some of you in prison and test you, and you will suffer persecution for 10 days. Be faithful even to the point of death, and I will give you the crown of life. So here we see a number of things, two things. He says, be faithful to the Lord in spite of financial or physical or relationship pressures. In fact, be faithful all the way till He takes you home. And secondly, he says, don't be afraid. Turn to your neighbor and say, don't be afraid. You say, how can that be? Because of who you are. You are a what? You're an overcomer. So turn to your other neighbor and say, don't be afraid. You're an overcomer. That brings me to the third letter. It's the letter to the church in Pergamum. Listen to what Jesus says to that church. These are the words of Him who has a sharp, double-edged sword. I know where you live, where Satan has his throne, yet you remain true to me. You did not renounce your faith in me, even in the days of Antipas, my faithful witness, who was put to death in your city where Satan lives. Nevertheless, I have a few things against you. You have people there who hold to the teachings of Balaam, who taught Balak to entice the Israelites to sin by eating food sacrificed to idols and by committing sexual immorality. Likewise, you also have those who hold to the teachings of the Nicolaitans. Repent, therefore, otherwise I will soon come to you and will fight against you with the sword of my mouth. Wow. Now, what did he just say? Here's what's interesting to me. Here's a church where it says that Satan's throne was at. It was Satan had his throne in that city. You say, now wait a minute, what are you talking about? Well, Satan is an angelic being, but that was his primary base of operation in the world at that time. Did you know that there were people that believed that all the way up until World War II? Did you know Hitler took the altar at Pergamum and brought it to Germany? Are you aware of that? He made a copy of it and brought it and put it in Berlin, the seat of government. He had a real strong belief in the power of that throne. Hello, and he was demonized. Now here's what's amazing to me. The very place where Satan's throne was, guess what? God had a church. I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not overcome it. Come on, somebody get excited. God's at work in the world, even where Satan has his throne. But what's amazing about this particular church, it teaches us how we can stay an overcomer. Because in spite of satanic pressure, we can stay true to Christ and not renounce him in any way. We are not to compromise with the world's values of sexual sin and shallow religion in order to gain social acceptance. That's what that whole thing was about with Balaam. Balaam, as you know, was the Old Testament prophet who a donkey talked to. Remember that? That was Balaam. Now, Balaam, the actual word in the Hebrew, means master of the people. Now, what's interesting is that he talks about the Nicolaitans. That is the Greek word for the same statement of Balaam. It means, in the Greek language, it means the conqueror of the people, or the master of the people. So what was happening in this church, you remember the story of Balaam. Balaam was a prophet that Balak, the king of the people at the time, the Amorites, the Midianites, and so forth and so on, they were all wanting to curse Israel because they were afraid of Israel. So they hired Balaam to curse Israel. And what's interesting is that every time Balaam got up to curse, God wouldn't let him, and he blessed Israel. And they were going to pay Balaam a lot of money, and Balaam wanted the money, but he couldn't get a curse out because God wouldn't let him. So you know what Balaam did? He said to the king, look, I'll give you some advice. All you need to do is to get your women to seduce the men of Israel, fornicate with them, take them to your pagan rituals, and have them worship your god of Baal, and God will destroy Israel for you. I don't even have to curse them. They'll curse themselves. So the king did that. He commissioned all his ladies to go out there. They seduced the men of Israel. They were fornicating. They were worshiping the gods of Baal. Peor is what it's called. And literally, God's wrath came on Israel, and he was destroying Israel. Until a man stood in the gap and stopped the plague. Now, here's what's interesting to me. That same idea was affecting the church. You had people saying, it's okay to fornicate as long as you love somebody, you can do what you want. Are you kidding me? That's a lie from the pit. Sex was never made for that. Sex was made for a lifetime commitment in covenant to see a man and a woman become one, to enjoy the intimacy of that marriage and the blessing of that marriage bond, and to have children. It wasn't to be a toy to play with. People are not things. They're not things to use. They're people to love. And true love is a commitment of your life to another. But our world has gotten so messed up that even in the church, they follow the world with their sexual morals. They follow the world with the idolatry. They were talking about not eating food offered to idols. It was because what would happen is the markets were always selling the food offered to idols. And there was a whole concern about idolatry. Did you know there's idolatry in the church? Our pictures of successes, who has the most money, or who does this, or fame, and all these other idols we put. And it gets sucked right into the church. And if you're going to be an overcomer, you've got to hear the word of the Lord and say, no way, Jose, I'm not doing this. I'm not doing this. I'm not going to yield to the flesh. Are you still with me here today?